Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here on a late afternoon on a working day, and thanks for giving me time and the opportunity to tell you something about a topic on which I'm hugely passionate, which is the topic of professionalism. I've got a ludicrous amount of slides to go through, so can everybody see the screen okay, is my first question. Yes. Good. What I'd like to do is really address the topic of professionalism and follow this structure. Just tell you a little bit about APM, Association for Project Management, talk a little bit about the PMAF APM partnership, but then try and major, I suppose, on the APM's 5 dimensions of professionalism, summarise, and then hopefully there'll be time for loud discussion, as Timo said. So that's what I'd like to do. Are you okay with that? Yes. Okay. Introduction to APM. We have a recognition that project management is a global profession, and we have a very small, modest, understated vision. And that vision is a world in which all projects succeed. And you know the market statistics as well as I do to know that really is quite a challenging vision, but a big aspiration. But we think it's a responsible one. We also think it's something that people can get inspired behind, and we think that the search for professionalism is one of the key ways to actually make this vision work. It's far too big a vision for one organisation to do on their own, that's clear. So that's why we're really proud that we're part of the International Project Management Association, a group of other member associations with similar aspirations to ours, and we're particularly proud to be working with your association, PMAF, in furthering the cause of professionalism. As a body, we're the lead professional body for project management in the UK, and I think our size makes us the largest independent professional body of our kind in Europe. We've got something like 21,000 individual members across 4,000 organisations. That's quite a respectable reach, I think. We've also got this figure of corporate members, 570, and they're across public and private sectors. And corporate members are a big issue for us, I think, in the same way as they are for PMAF. Partly because they're users of what we produce, but probably more importantly because they're co-producers in what we produce. So the fact that big leading name corporate organisations help us produce material, that's almost a ready-made guarantee that the material we produce is relevant, up-to-date, appropriate, fit for purpose. So we're very proud of this corporate membership, and I'm very pleased that my colleague Nick Jones there, who takes a huge amount of interest on the corporate member side, is here to support me, and if there's questions that we between us can answer at the end, we clearly will. We're across all industry sectors. That's quite important, I think. We think that project management is a pan-sector profession, and we need to be a pan-sector body so that we can adequately represent it. We are a charity founded in 1972, so depending on how we feel when we get out of bed, we're either 42 years young or 42 years old. But we are a charity, but what we try and remember is something a very wise American said, which is a vision without funding is hallucination. So what we try and do is have this big vision, but realise we have to be utterly business-like in how we behave, because we want to be sufficiently well funded to invest in all the projects which underpin our vision. What gets us out of bed in the morning is professionalism. That's what we get excited about. We're continually campaigning about it, and more importantly, I suppose, we're actually trying to make it happen in practice. We work out of premises in London. This is west of London, purpose designed facilities. We employ about 80 people, full-time staff, which is a decent size, but our real strength comes from our equivalent to you, the members and the volunteers who actually participate in what we do. We take our volunteer base extremely importantly, and we were very honoured actually to become the first ever UK professional body to win this independent award of investing in volunteers. So what that says is we as a body think volunteers are hugely important, we pay them great respect, I hope we treat them well, and in return they give us and the profession fantastic support. So this investing in volunteers accolade, you could say, is one of the things I'm almost most proud of having achieved as Chief Executive, because that is one of the things that makes us as an organisation particularly special, I think. Clearly we've got a history, and I suspect that this history is similar to yours. I should think 10, 15 years ago our membership was 80% engineering and construction and about 20% everything else. Does that sort of sound familiar? Very sort of conventional sources of the sectors where the membership came from. For us now that's completely changed, and I don't expect you to read this in detail, but the very fact this is a kaleidoscope, it shows that no single sector now accounts for more than 12% of our membership, and we've grown in that time. So it's not that engineering and construction have got smaller, it's just that everybody else has come in. And what we think this demonstrates is that every single sector, certainly in the UK, and I suspect increasingly within Finland, has an interest and can gain strategic benefit from project management. So we're quite excited about this because it means that we have a right, in a sense, to spread our message everywhere we go. We have a legacy though, and it's not a legacy that we're particularly proud of, but if you don't own up to what your history is, how can you possibly proceed? And the legacy for us as a profession is that project management hasn't been recognised historically as a discrete standalone profession. Some people didn't recognise it at all. Some people perhaps might have a first discipline of an architect or an engineer, construction expert, and did a bit of project management as an afterthought, and I think that probably rings true for a lot of markets. So what that meant was that, in a sense, people became project managers by accident as opposed to by intention, and with that came the feeling that project management was not a career of first choice. What that meant in turn was that anybody could call themselves a project manager. You could turn to anybody on the street, and if they felt like being a project manager that day, that's what they were, and no one could stop them. And that's dangerous, I think, because it meant that people were being let loose on projects because they said they were a project manager, but actually they didn't have the competence to do that. And I think also, if you throw into the mix, there was a confusion of knowledge with competence. People thought you can go on a 5-day knowledge course and that makes you a project manager. Well, no, it doesn't. It's really helpful, it's a really good thing, but it's not the same thing as being competent. But certainly in the UK market, a lot of people, for a lot of the time, thought that knowledge on its own was enough. So for us that's quite a difficult legacy, but if we face up to the legacy, it gives us a chance, we think, to move ahead. And this legacy is brought out in some of the government statistics. In the UK, there's an organisation called the Major Projects Authority, which over the last 2 years has produced performance data for all the projects within its control, and they don't make happy reading. So the last report but one talked about only a 40% effectively success rate, so that's a 60% failure rate, which wasted my money. I'm a UK taxpayer, I'm upset about this, particularly because it's to do with the failure of projects. So not a very happy position to be in. A great political triumph for this agency to have got this data out in the public. It took the person concerned 2 years to get this report published because every single department wanted it not to be published. And one of the tests in the UK about how politically sensitive these documents are is the day on which they're published. This was published on a Friday afternoon before an extended holiday when everybody was expected to have gone. So this is a very important document for us because it made the UK face up to its failings. It made the UK profession face up to the fact that actually it wasn't doing very well. Because there is an urgency to this, which is that too many projects still fail, and we can see it from the UK statistics. I think it's a global phenomenon. I don't know what the Finnish statistics are, but if you look at global reports such as the Standish report, or there was a PricewaterhouseCoopers report published a couple of years ago, they talk about 30%, 40% success rates. And okay, you can argue about how are the criteria defined, but on any measure this is not a good outcome. So there's a big opportunity, I think you could say, that too many projects still fail. Successful practice is too frequently ignored. That quite often happens, I think. People talk about lessons learned and then they just put everything away. So we continually fight this issue, and one of the strengths of a professional body like PMAF and APM is that we're a forum to allow lessons to be learnt and shared and hopefully actually taken advantage of. It's certainly the case in our environment that professional project management skills are in short supply. That's an issue. Also, that failure often lies beyond the boundaries of traditional project management. Sometimes you could say that project managers themselves have been insufficiently competent. You could also say that sometimes failure comes because the sponsors of projects are themselves incompetent. I can see some nodding here, and increasingly we see that, I think. There's a very nice phrase that a Siemens MD used once. He said there's no such thing as a failure in project management, only a failure in governance. And there's a certain amount of truth in that, I think, because if you set up the wrong projects and you don't assure yourself of the competence of the people project managing it, it's going to fail, however technically gifted the project manager. So I think this is quite a big issue. And in our view, it means that professionalism applies not just to the individual, but to the organisation too, and in particular to the board, for whom governance is the key responsibility. And all this is urgent because, certainly in the private sector, I guess it's no different in Finland to the UK, the stock market is continually looking for enhanced stakeholder value. We increasingly in the UK find business analysts saying to companies, show me how you're going to improve the return on investment by effective project management. And there is no escape from that scrutiny, particularly in the public sector as well. The press, media generally getting completely unrelenting in how they judge project failure or success. Once upon a time, people would accept failure. I think now we've come to a turning point that people absolutely won't. And the great thing about this professionalism story is that it allows you to address the problem and say, I've got a solution, which is a really compelling argument, I think. And there is this urgency in the UK because not only is the high failure rate historically, but the sums of money for us are huge. The top 200 projects in the UK within the government's control are almost £500 billion, which to me is mouth-wateringly big, frighteningly big. And if that amount of money only has a 43% chance of success, that means an awful lot of money, taxpayers' money, is being wasted when it could be spent on other things. So as far as we're concerned in the UK, we've had almost a perfect storm of difficult legacy, huge urgency, which in my mind then makes a huge opportunity. And I think the opportunity is because things have got so bad that now effective project management has made its way into everyday language. It's made its way into the discussions that politicians continually have. At the moment, the UK civil service is being reformed, and one of the 4 key skills that civil servants now have to have is that of project management. So our profession is right at the centre of the public sector debate. So that's a civil service reform plan. There's a UK government spending policeman called the National Audit Office. They're talking about project management. And the House of Commons, through its various committees, is also talking about project management. So everywhere you go, it's being talked about. We're also helped by the fact that this is David Cameron, our Prime Minister, who has particular views on Europe. I'm not sure if you share them, so we probably ought not to talk about that, particularly as we're being filmed. But one of the things that he did, which is spectacularly powerful for the profession, is he launched something called the Major Projects Authority in 2011. And what that said was, I, the Prime Minister, am making project management, effective project management, central to my premiership. and he actually set up the Major Projects Authority with the power to manage the major government project portfolio, with the power to intervene, with the power to develop the public sector project management profession, and that power came directly from him. So he actually signed the mandate, which is terrific for us because it means that it's being taken really seriously. So people in power with good vision, it's not restricted to the UK. This is Timo Saros, who, as you know, with his fellow members of the board, has constructed the PMAF vision and strategy, which quite explicitly says that in Finland the project profession should become a new cornerstone for the national economy. So I think that's a really good, bold, strong statement and absolutely echoes what we have tried to help achieve in the UK. So it feels to me like the time is ready for the profession to really lift its game and to push this professionalism agenda. We take huge confidence from the fact that we did the Olympics in 2012, and I'm proud to say, as being part of the project management community, then we did it very well. And what that did was give the profession, but also the UK public, that we could put on a big project and do it really well. So that again is a really useful part of our context, which is difficult past, huge importance to get it right, a lot of scrutiny, but proof to ourselves, the self-confidence that if we get it right, we can get it very right. So for us, the Olympics is a big turning point, and I think that's, its sort of symbolism can't be underestimated. We're also doing our bit, and it's part of the role that I think PMAF is doing and needs to continue doing in the Finnish market, is we're trying to make sure that project management gets in the newspapers for the right reasons. So this is a screen grab from the website of the UK's biggest or most influential newspaper called The Telegraph. It ran a feature on project management in which we featured very large. We've even got an interview with our chairman talking about professionalism embedded in the Telegraph website. So this is all us trying to make professionalism heighten its awareness and show what part we as a professional body, and therefore our members and the project management profession generally, can do. And if it's good enough for the Telegraph, it's quite good enough for its competitor. This is the Times, where we ran a special project management supplement with them last year, done a similar thing just now recently, and that gave me a chance to put some words in there about new professionals for new infrastructure projects. So if anybody's prepared to listen, anybody's prepared to read this story, we will please tell them, because we work on the principle that it's a bit like a broken record. You've got to keep saying the same message to try and drive it home. And I suspect that's probably what colleagues at PMAF, with your help, also need to do. Increasingly, we see this as a profession of first choice. That's one of the dynamics in our sector. Instead of people being accidental project managers, we see people wanting to be intentional project managers. And again, that's a terribly important distinction, because it means that people see the need to be professional right from the word go. One of the indicators for that is an increase in undergraduate numbers we see in the UK, and one of the really helpful results of this phenomenon is we're seeing more women in project management. When I first started 10 years ago, the statistics suggested that 85% of our membership and of the profession at large were men, 15% women. 10 years on, and I don't claim any credit for this, but it has happened over the last 10 years, it's 70% men, 30% women. But the most, I think, exciting is probably the right word to say, the most exciting statistic is the study of students, where actually there are now more women studying project management than men. So when you consider that just 10 years ago, 85-15, and now actually that's completely reversed, that's a hugely helpful thing, I think, and will completely change the colour and tone of the profession. So that feels like a good thing. I think another thing that has come out from our promotion of the lessons learned from the Olympics is that project management isn't rocket science. It's not a profession that should exclude people. There's certainly a lot of clever and good things that need doing, a lot of innovative things that can be created, and the Olympics exemplified that. But this lady here, Kenna Kintria, who was head of venues and infrastructure, Olympic Delivery Authority, when she spoke, and in fact all of the people involved in the Olympic programme spoke, every single person used this phrase. They said it's not rocket science, it is difficult, and some of it is clever, but actually the thing that made the Olympics possible is project management rigour, working out the basics and doing the basics and not allowing anybody to stand in your way. And I think that's a very inclusive and good message, because it means that professionalism should be within our grasp. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to be an effective project manager. And that was such a strong message to come from the Olympics, which was such a big success. So I think a lot of things are phenomena are coming together at the right time for the profession to make professionalism utterly vital. Just to touch on the partnership really quite briefly, because I think Timo has touched on that. I think like any good project, it has gone through a good structured process, and I think that should give everybody heart that the end result of the partnership is robust and solid and well thought through. It was actually quite a hard journey, which makes it all the more surprising that Heikki and I seem to find it so amusing when we signed the document in 2012, I think. But this is a well thought through partnership, and what we now want to do is to continue to make it work really effectively. In terms of the 5 dimensions of professionalism, it's based on a concept of profession, which might sound a bit like a blinding statement of the obvious, but we researched this quite heavily, and rather than invent our own definition of profession, we used this one, which is defined by the UK Interprofessional Group in Professional Regulation, which kind of slips off the tongue, doesn't it? But these are a very worthy bunch of men and women who came up with this very good definition, which you can read here. But what it said is there's some key words. It's an occupation in which an individual uses an intellectual skill, that's very important, based on an established body of knowledge, that's important, and practice, providing a specialised service, because that's what we're doing. We're giving a service to people who know less about this than we do in a defined area, exercising independent judgment, that's another word. A true professional doesn't do everything by process and practice and methodology. There has to be some judgment applied, I think, which means it all the more important that there should be a code of ethics, a moral dimension to what people do. Because our view of a profession is, if you've got the best technical skills in the world, but you're completely amoral, then you shouldn't be a professional. And linked with that is this idea that a professional acts in the public interest. So this definition for us is really important. And on the back of that, we then developed this model of the 5 dimensions of professionalism. And I think we would all accept that all models are wrong because they oversimplify, but some models are helpful. And I really hope that this is one of the helpful ones, but judge for yourself. What we try and do is to say that based on that definition of the profession, you can actually pull out 5 different dimensions of what being a professional actually means. So we think there's a breadth dimension, a depth, achievement, commitment, and accountability. And each of these has its own sort of description and artifacts that go with it. So we think breadth is defined by a framework or a methodology which defines the profession, if you like. And for us, it's our body of knowledge. There's a depth dimension which we think is the competence framework which maps the levels of knowledge and experience in the appropriate way, and we have a competence framework which does that. Achievement is very important, so qualifications which provide development opportunities or applied experience itself we would see as an effective element of the achievement dimension. And commitment, particularly in a fast-moving fast evolving profession. We think a professional has a duty to him or herself and to the profession to keep updated the whole time. It's no good just to have got qualified at a certain point and then hope for the best. We think there's an obligation on a professional to keep refreshing their knowledge. So this commitment is a key part of it. And then finally, but not least importantly, there's this accountability. And we believe it should be an accountability to a code of professional conduct. So a code that guides people's behaviour, but also offers them punishment, or provides punishment, if people are in conflict with that code. And we are quite clear at APM, there is a disciplinary committee, and if people are found to have been in conflict with the code of conduct, we will say, we don't want you as a member, please, you are disbarred. So we have that right of sanction. So this is a very important thing. We take a much more positive role and say we would much rather encourage people to behave responsibly and ethically, but we still do hold this power of veto, which we think is a really key part of the 5 dimensions. So I guess, just going back to what I was saying before, and this confusion of knowledge and competence, we're quite clear that this model says that knowledge on its own is really important and it's necessary, but it's not a sufficient condition for success. And that's for us quite an important message, and I think it's a message that we would continually look to you to help us support. 5-day course, really important, but it's not enough to be a professional. There's a whole range of other things that need to be done, we think, if people are going to be professional, to address the various issues. And 5 dimensions, it's not appropriate to say I'm going to choose 2 or 3. It's all 5 dimensions or nothing in our view. So we find this quite a strong model because it can apply to individuals. How do you rate yourself on each of these 5 dimensions? Are there things that you can do to improve your rating, if you like? Clearly you can use it for yourself, clearly you can use it for your teams, whatever. You can also use it at organisational level, because an organisation can use this model to say, to what extent do our learning and development activities for the project management community support each of these 5 dimensions? And with a number of organisations we've worked very closely, and they have actually become accredited against this model because they have built their entire learning and development activities around the model. So that's a really strong use, I think, both for the individual but also for the organisation. And going back to the point we were saying about governance and this idea of an intelligent customer, intelligent client, intelligent organisation, this model is one of the ways of trying to make that happen in practice. I would say this, wouldn't I, because I'm passionate about it and it comes from my organisation. The best test, I think, is though those organisations which use it. And some of the companies here, I think there are 57, 60 companies in the UK who are accredited to this 5-dimension model. Here are just some of them, and they're big blue chip names for us, and I think some of them you will recognise yourselves, I would hope, whether it's Shell or Fujitsu, Siemens are there somewhere, I think. So these are big names who have actually said this model is so good and so helpful for us that we can gain benefit by not only aligning our activity with it, but also by being able to show the outside world that what we do has been assessed by an independent third party. So that, they feel, has got huge value, and companies such as the ones you can see here use it for their corporate development programs, their in-house academies, their career frameworks, communities of practice, role profiles, and so on. So this model is literally scalable in all sorts of different ways. So the relationship that we're glad to have formed with PMAF is all to do with providing elements to populate the 5 dimensions for PMAF. So if you look at this little table here, in the left-hand column you've got each of the 5 dimensions. In the right-hand column you've got the things that PMAF already offers. All of them very good. There are a few gaps. What the relationship that PMAF and APM has is the opportunity for us to fill the gaps with the various things that we have here. So literally at the stroke of an agreement, the shake of a hand, all these things become available to PMAF members in a privileged way, whether it's the body of knowledge, the competence framework, all these various resources that you can see here. So we're excited about making this partnership work, because PMAF, with your help, could clearly do all these things on your own. The only benefit here is that you can do it much quicker because they're ready-made from us, and they're just that, ready-made and immediately available. So in a sense, that's what the relationship is designed to achieve, to bring good, tested, market-tried resources immediately to your benefit as members, and so on. So here are the benefits. I would say this, but I believe it to be true. This model works. It's been tried and tested in the UK, and a lot of people have adopted it. Members can get access to an increased range of resources, a wider community. Digital is becoming increasingly important to us. This gives you a chance to be part of that, should you wish. And really it's all to do with recognising the strengths that PMAF have already, but helping fill the gaps to accelerate growth. And all of the things we're doing are in support of our various strategies, each of which support the other. PMAF believe in a world in which all projects succeed, so do we, so do IPMA. I guess the key thing also to say is that we're not resting on our laurels, we're continually producing material, and that's because we've got this fantastic volunteer base, we've got this really strong group of corporate members as well as the paid staff that we have, so we're continually doing stuff. So whether we're producing guidance with the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors on stakeholder engagement, something on integrated assurance, all leading edge stuff with thinkers taken from leading companies in the UK, but increasingly from overseas markets too. And there's a hope that you will be able, if you wish, participate in some of the specific interest groups and be part of this knowledge generation. There's some slightly more unusual things. Gamification, is that a concept you're familiar with? What this is saying is that the electronic games industry is hugely popular. One of the techniques that one can take from the electronic games that are produced is ways that the games incentivize and motivate and encourage the players to continue and get better. So actually there's some quite clever insights you can take from the world of electronic games and apply them to project management. It may sound a bit bizarre, but we'll make sure that the link to this guide is available. There's some quite clever stuff here. And little insights about team motivation. It talks about how the electronic games industry gives immediate feedback in small ways, but in real time, and that's hugely motivating to continue stuff. And you might say that's a blinding statement of the obvious, but in terms of project reporting, there's various tricks that can be learned. Or things like, in the electronic games, feedback is, or rewards or gratification is quick, small and continuous. You don't wait to the end of the game and get something. There's always something happening. And again, there may be some insights that can be applied to the world of project management, particularly if the community of project managers is getting younger, and it's getting younger because it's increasingly a profession of first choice. So in a sense, the profession, I think, has to change to reflect the fact that, luckily, it is getting younger. A lot of professions are getting older and at some point may die out because people aren't attracted into them. Project management is quite the reverse, I think, and is in a very strong, healthy position because of that. A lot of stuff we're putting online, you'd expect that. We're using the website increasingly as a vehicle for communication. We've got something like 600,000 unique annual visitors per year. We do a lot of physical events in the UK. This chart just says over the course of a year we might get 5,000 physical people. You might think that's quite small, particularly when your conference, I know, gets 1,000 people in the middle of November. For us, that's quite a respectable figure. But what we've found is that we're putting all of our material up on the web through SlideShare presentations or through videos. And whereas we might get 5,000 physical visitors in a year, every month we could get 14,000 people using it remotely. So we're very much looking for our volunteers to produce really useful content and then making that content available in a really, I would hope, accessible and useful way. And again, that's one of the things that with our partnership becomes available to you and colleagues within PMAF. So that's really what I wanted to say. So thanks very much for allowing me to say it. I've tried to say a little bit about APM and what we're about in the UK. Tried to make you aware how pleased and proud we are that we're working with PMAF. I think there's lots of things that we can learn from Finland. I would hope there are some things that we can contribute to you, particularly in terms of this model of 5 dimensions of professionalism, which says it isn't just about knowledge, it is actually about 5 dimensions and all of them. No choice. All 5 dimensions or nothing. And it's a model that's really widely accepted in the UK, and the whole professionalism agenda does seem to suit the spirit of the time. So we're hugely positive about that. And that was the summary, and I would hope we're going to go into a little bit of discussion. So thanks very much. Poof. Thank you.
So, any questions?
Yeah, I was wondering about the relationship between the APM body of knowledge and the frameworks that you provide and Prince2 in the UK.
Complementary. Complementary. We, once upon a time, it might have been thought that what APM did and APM Group did, because they in those days had the contract, was in conflict. But we're increasingly aware that the two approaches fit together, because clearly Prince2 is very much process driven, and we see our approach through the body of knowledge much more of an overarching framework. So we think that both things should fit together particularly well. One of the good examples I had given to me was, they said it's a bit like if your child goes to school and they come back in the evening and they say, we've been offered a choice. We can either learn to read, or we can learn to we can either learn to read, or we can learn to count. You can't have both, because actually it's a false choice. You want your children to be literate and numerate. And I think it's exactly the same with Prince2 and our qualifications and approach, to the extent that we have a level D qualification and we produced a special route into our level D qualification, which allowed those people who were Prince2 practitioners currently to get in with a shorter syllabus of study, because we didn't see the point in making, provided they were current, making people study the same bit of information twice. But we realized there's quite a bit of overlap between the two approaches, though there are also large areas of distinctiveness. So we tried to make it easy for people to do both. So we continually talk about doing both Prince2 and our approaches, rather than say it's an either or choice. Yeah, if that answers your question.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I very much agree with you about these 5 dimensions, but I was thinking about, for example, Vaisala project management, why we have some great successes, some mediocre, and some fails. And I think that in our case, the enthusiasm is kind of a 6th element, because when we found a right match, right project manager for the right project, then we will get those best results because of the enthusiasm.
Yeah. I think that's probably, I completely agree with that. I would just be devil's advocate and say, I would say that over-enthusiasm is an equal and opposite danger.
You are absolutely right, because then they just want to continue and get a little bit better measuring results and...
Yeah, and I think there's also a lot of research done in the UK which suggests that one of the main causes of project failure is starting too quickly and too enthusiastically without having studied all the business case.
Yeah.
And we're very fortunate in the UK government. The previous chairman of BP, Lord Brown, actually works as a non-executive director within UK government. So he exerts an influence on how the UK government views project management. He wrote a really good synopsis of his 40 years experience. It's a 6-page document called Getting a Grip. And it's full of little insights from his business life, and he talks about if an idea or a project starts off half-baked, 50% good, that's as good as it's ever going to be. So he's very, very strong about curbing the enthusiasm, get it right from the start, and then let the implementation happen. But, sorry, to your original point, I think enthusiasm is a key interpersonal skills, because it is to do with motivation, it is to do with emotional resilience, all these sorts of things, isn't it?
And how they get the spirit for the team members. And
I think that's it. I mean, certainly one of the themes that we hear a lot about is it's not just project management, it's project leadership, and that's a different level of skill again, I think. So again, it's sort of saying that it's not just a technical competence, there's a whole range of behavioural skills and traits that are needed as well. I should have waited quietly before I answered, but
I think I deserve it.
One of the things that I have found, first of all, I agree with what you are saying.
Good.
Question about it. But the point is that a lot of people knows those things, but there is a lack of disciplines to follow what you know.
Yeah.
And that is of course, this enthusiasm kind of helps you to follow those disciplines. This is really a driver for that. But the point kind of is that if you don't kind of follow those disciplines, you cannot achieve. It doesn't matter if you know something, but if those are not turned into the actions, then you can't succeed.
I think that's a very interesting point. I think there's two things I would say to that. I think one of the things that's tremendously important is organisational culture, and that's why I think organisations have to get this professionalism piece, because else the trouble is a project manager who spots trouble, for example, perhaps a lessons learnt, and tries to apply it, if their senior management or sponsor won't support them, then they're going to fail. And I remember I gave a presentation similar to this to the government department which collects our taxes. So I wouldn't normally be pleased to be in the company of so many taxmen, but it was actually good because it was their project management community. And I talked about this dimension of accountability and said that they had a duty to stand up. And if their code of conduct said they had to stand up and stop something, they should feel able to do that, and their organisation should support them in doing that. And the head of the government department, the civil servant, the permanent secretary was there, and there was then this huge discussion from the community saying, do we trust you, yes or no? And it was a very sort of honest discussion, and the answer was actually they did, but the people at the top had to set the tone which said it's okay to wave a red flag, to apply lessons learned. But I suspect there are some cultures where that isn't the case, and that's then much more difficult.
Yeah.
And there was a second part to the answer which I have now forgotten.
You showed a few examples of some papers that you published as an organization. Could you talk a little bit about how you commission papers, or are they sort of volunteered to you and then you review and publish, or how does it work?
Thank you. It's a very good question. We have a network, I think the same as you, called a specific interest group network, and we would look to this network to, in a sense, be our thought leaders. And typically there will be a demand in the profession for some thought leadership in an area which will then form a specific interest group, and a case in point is our portfolio management SIG, specific interest group, and that was formed after the economic crisis in the UK, when a lot of government departments had to slash their budgets by 10, 20 or 30% and didn't know how to address that from a portfolio point of view. Because the easy way would have been to say, let's leave every project intact but take 30% off each project. They realised that the only responsible thing was to prioritise the projects such that the most important projects should continue and the ones that were less important should be stopped, which was a very brave political thing to do. And they realised they were struggling. So what they did was to form a specific interest group, because they said, we need to form a group who are interested in this. We as public sector people also want to talk to the private sector because we think there's some quite important lessons we can learn both ways. And there were some very, very good discussions. I remember once going to one of these group meetings in the early days and the public sector people saying, we're the only people who have this so difficult in terms of portfolio management. And there was somebody there from one of the big pharmaceutical companies who said, don't tell me that. I've just had to stop a pilot program on a experimental drug, and it's had children involved in it, and it could have saved their lives, and I've got to tell the parents that it's got to stop. So, I mean, pretty horrific. So these groups get together because they've got problems. They want to develop knowledge together, and then they share knowledge. So to answer your question, the majority of the knowledge comes from people with a particular desire to gain benefit from it for their own practical purposes, and then to share it. And that's exactly the same with these gamification people. They were actually a group of young professionals we had identified in APM. We gave them some money because they were interested in it, and we said, go and research this. And they did, and they said this is so interesting that we'd actually like to publish the results, which we encouraged them to do. So it tends to be sort of led just by people who are interested, knowledgeable, committed, but also sufficiently unselfish to think that the profession needs to gain from this as well as us. So good people like you, I guess, because that's one of the things that motivates you as a community. Yeah.
By the way, I have a couple of publications here. Again, there is a Body of Knowledge 6th edition and 5th. I can put them there. You can look. Maybe this one there. So all these are available in web pages, and there is much more even. I don't know how many publications you have, but quite a many.
About 20 or 30, I think. Yeah.
Have you had any research or studies about change management? Because I think that most of the projects are something that managing the change, and there is even higher kind of percentage of paid projects when we look in general about the change management. And for me, I have seen kind of like many times that it is the resistance that is really causing the failure of the project.
I think that's very well said, and I think that goes back to the point we were saying earlier about starting earlier and involving the user groups and all those who will be affected right from the very beginning. And to answer your question, we've literally in the last 6 months established a specific interest group called Enabling Change, and it's sort of brackets within organisations. So I think it's just the sort of points that you're describing. A lot of elements of politics and interpersonal skills and so on. So if you wanted to join up to it electronically, please do. And see if there's some material that you can take, but also more importantly, please, is there some information or some insights that you could contribute? And please do. I mean, because it's, the whole thing is what we're trying to do is to, the help of people such as PMAF, is grow this professional community which actually grows its collective wisdom. But yeah, so completely agree. Completely agree. And the UK is littered with examples where this didn't work. Yeah, unfortunately.